Today we're diving into a topic that often finds itself on the fringes of public discourse: conspiracy theories about globalism. Now, before we begin, let me clarify that the purpose of this video is not to endorse or dismiss these theories, but to present them for discussion and critical thinking. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring that bell for more mind-bending explorations every day. Now let's delve into the world of globalism conspiracy theories, exploring the narratives that have captured the attention of many and the reasons behind their appeal. Number 1. One world government. One of the most prevalent theories is the idea of a one-world government. This theory posits that a small cabal of ultra-wealthy and influential individuals, known as the global elite, are working tirelessly towards establishing a single centralized world government. The core belief is that these elites seek absolute control, which they aim to achieve by dissolving national sovereignty and concentrating all governmental power into one entity. They believe that such a system would allow for more efficient management of the planet's resources and populations, thereby ushering in an era of unparalleled peace and prosperity. However, critics of this theory argue that a one-world government would inevitably lead to the erosion of individual freedoms and the suppression of local cultures, as a standardized global governance system would prioritize uniformity over diversity. Number 2. Secret influence of global organizations. Conspiracy theorists often claim that several global organizations, including the United Nations, the World Economic Forum, or the IMF, operate with a high degree of secrecy, pulling strings to influence global events and policies without any real accountability to the public. It is believed that these institutions serve as tools for the global elite to manipulate world affairs according to their agenda, bypassing democratic processes and the interests of individual nations. Proponents of this theory point to instances where decisions made by these organizations have had profound impacts on national economies and social structures, without any direct mandate from citizens. However, defenders of these organizations argue that they are merely intergovernmental bodies working to address complex global challenges that transcend national borders, and that their actions are transparent and based on consensus among member nations. Number 3. Controlled crises for global power shifts. Some conspiracy theories go even further, alleging that global crises such as pandemics, wars, or economic collapses are not merely unfortunate events, but are intentionally manipulated, or at least exploited by the global elite to further their agenda. The theory suggests that by creating or allowing these crises to occur, the global elite can push for radical changes in global governance and power structures. For instance, proponents of this theory might argue that the C-19 was deliberately amplified to justify increased surveillance measures and restrictions on personal freedoms, ultimately leading to a more controlled society. Similarly, they might posit that ongoing conflicts are manipulated to create chaos and instability, paving the way for the imposition of a one-world government. Number 4. Digital currency and social credit systems. The rise of central bank digital currencies, CBDCs, and global digital ID systems has fueled conspiracy theories suggesting that these developments are part of a plot to centralize control over money and behavior on a global scale. Proponents of this theory believe that digital currencies will enable governments and international organizations to track and regulate every financial transaction, thereby curtailing individual freedoms and potentially imposing arbitrary limits on how people spend their money. Furthermore, they worry that social credit systems, which evaluate citizens based on their behavior and economic activity, could be used to discriminate against individuals who do not conform to certain norms or who dissent against the government. Critics of this theory argue that CBDCs and digital ID systems offer greater convenience and security, and that concerns about government overreach are unfounded. They assert that these technologies do not necessarily entail greater control, and that privacy can be safeguarded through robust regulations. Number 5. Erasing national borders. Globalism is sometimes linked to the idea of erasing national borders, which has given rise to conspiracy theories suggesting that the weakening of national identity and the promotion of mass migration are deliberate strategies to dilute cultures and standardize control across populations. Some theorists argue that open borders and the free movement of people are part of a plan to reduce national sovereignty and create a more homogeneous global citizenry that is easier to govern. They believe that this process is driven by organizations like the United Nations, which advocates for international cooperation and global citizenship. However, opponents of this theory argue that the free movement of people is a fundamental human right, and that national borders should be fluid to allow for cultural exchange and economic opportunities. They assert that diversity, far from being a threat, enriches societies and that globalism does not necessarily entail the erasure of national borders. Number 6. Global surveillance infrastructure. Prominent conspiracy theory claims that a global surveillance infrastructure is being quietly built using advanced technologies such as satellites, facial recognition, and artificial intelligence, AI, to monitor and shape citizen behavior on a worldwide scale. Proponents of this theory believe that organizations like the UN and WEF are instrumental in developing and implementing these systems, which they argue will be used to control populations and enforce compliance with globalist agendas. They fear that this surveillance will be used to suppress dissent, manipulate behavior, and restrict individual freedoms under the guise of maintaining order and security. However, those who oppose this theory argue that advancements in surveillance technology are simply a reflection of rapid technological progress, and that concerns about government overreach are unfounded. They contend that these technologies do not necessarily entail greater control, and that privacy can be safeguarded through robust regulations. Number 7. Globalism, masquerading as environmentalism. Global climate initiatives and environmental policies have also been drawn into the realm of globalist conspiracy theories. Some argue that globalism is using the urgency of climate change as a cover to push for radical economic and political restructuring, granting power to unelected bodies and undermining national sovereignty. They believe that by focusing public attention on the threat of climate change, globalist organizations can push for policies that serve their own interests, rather than those of nation-states or their citizens. For instance, some argue that the push for renewable energy is not genuinely about reducing carbon emissions, but about concentrating power in the hands of a few multinational corporations that dominate the green energy sector. However, those who oppose this theory argue that climate change is a real and pressing issue that requires urgent global action, and that globalism is not necessarily a nefarious plot, but a genuine effort to address shared environmental challenges. Number 8. Corporate government symbiosis. At the heart of globalism, conspiracy theories lies the belief that multinational corporations and global policymakers work in tandem to advance globalist agendas, often at the expense of national interests and individual rights. Proponents of this theory argue that corporations have undue influence over governments and international organizations, shaping global economic and social norms to suit their own interests, rather than those of the people they are supposed to serve. This perceived collusion between corporations and governments is seen as a means to erode national sovereignty and create a more integrated global economy, which can lead to the centralization of power in the hands of a few. However, critics of this theory argue that the relationship between corporations and governments is one of constant negotiation, and that corporations are not simply puppets of globalist organizations. Number 9. The loss of individual freedoms. Perhaps the most significant fear driving globalism conspiracy theories is the potential loss of individual freedoms. Proponents of these theories argue that globalist agendas, if implemented, could lead to a future where personal rights, free speech, and local laws are overwritten by centralized regulations and restrictions imposed by a single world government or a small cabal of elite organizations. They worry that the centralization of power could result in the suppression of dissent and the imposition of a standardized set of values and behaviors on a global scale, leaving no room for local cultures or traditions. This fear is particularly acute around issues like abortion, LGBTQ rights, and gun control, which are often seen as flashpoints in the battle between globalist ideals and local values. However, critics of this theory argue that the loss of freedoms is not inevitable, and that fears of a centralized, oppressive government are unfounded. Number 10. Cultural unification and media synchronization. A common thread in globalism conspiracy theories is the idea of cultural unification through the promotion of a single cultural narrative, often disseminated through mainstream media and entertainment. This narrative typically promotes values and perspectives aligned with globalist ideals, such as the acceptance of LGBTQ issues, the importance of global citizenship, and the need for international cooperation. Proponents of this theory argue that the synchronization of cultural products is a deliberate attempt to reduce national identity and cultural diversity, thereby making it easier to impose a standardized set of beliefs and values on a global population. They believe that this process is driven by a small group of elites who seek to control the flow of information and shape global public opinion. However, critics of this theory argue that the convergence of cultures is a natural byproduct of globalization and technological advancements, not a deliberate strategy to reduce national identity. These theories, while often dismissed as fringe and conspiratorial, reflect deep-seated anxieties about the increasing interconnectedness of our world. They highlight fears of a future dominated by centralized control, economic inequality, and the suppression of local cultures and individual freedoms. Understanding these anxieties, even if we do not agree with them, is crucial for fostering dialogue and addressing the legitimate concerns that drive people to such extreme theories. If you found this video insightful, please give it a thumbs up and share it with others. Your engagement helps us continue producing quality content. Thank you for watching.